So, in thinking about going through a research project, doing some sort of paper or any other type of project whereby you might indicate the results of your research, there are a couple of things to recognize. First of all, research begins with a question or a problem. Now, sometimes that means you need to do a little bit of investigating before you even determine what your problem is. So, for example, if you are in a Gospel of John class, right? And we'll continue to use this example of the woman taken in adultery. Okay? And you're told, right, this is your assignment. Do a paper on some passage in the book of John. That's all you're told. It's left up to you. You find a passage, decide what you want to do, and you start reading through, and you just happen to come across this passage in John 8, and you say, oh, that's a really interesting passage. I'd like to do a paper on that passage. Right. So far, you haven't gotten to the point of determining a research project. And so let's say you didn't know anything about this issue of whether or not the passage belongs in John. So you might need to do some reading before you say, okay, the problem I'm investigating is whether or not this belongs in the Gospel of John. And so, you haven't gotten to a research part, you haven't gotten to a research project until you can indicate what is it what question are you investigating? What problem are you tackling? Now you are involved in research. But also, not only do you have a question or problem, there is also a goal that you have as well. Research, again, is that systematic investigation, or involves systematic investigation. It should have a clear goal in mind. That clear goal should be the answer to your question. Now, it shouldn't be you already kind of predetermined what you want your goal to be. But as you engage in research, you want to have a goal. I want to discover the answer to this question. So it shouldn't just be this kind of, well, I'm going to investigate and wander around and just kind of put it all together and figure out something. Right? Now, instead, research should bring together what start with a question, but end with a goal. Anything then that goes into the research project and ultimately the research paper should be shaped by that problem or question. It's very easy in looking through and reading different sources to come to something that's really, really interesting. But if it's not specifically focused on your research problem, then it's something that you should put aside for another day. Don't follow that rabbit down that hole. Instead, stay focused on the problem. Right? My question is, does this passage belong in the Gospel of John? Well, here's this interesting thing I found about the woman at the well of Samaria. Right? Okay, great. Hold that off for something else. Stay focused on your problem or goal. Just to kind of give you a brief example of this. A couple years ago, I was in the process of writing a paper on Alexander Campbell, early leader of the American Restoration Movement, and some of his writings in western Pennsylvania, where he kind of starts in the United States. And so I was going through and reading through a bunch of different newspapers from the early 1800s. And I would find these rather interesting, like classified ads, interesting stories about other things. So people would take classified ads out in the 1800s in the newspaper, saying things like, my wife has left me, and any debt she accumulates, I'm not paying for. Really kind of, we don't think of that kind of stuff showing up in a newspaper on a website today. But here it was, these people had taken these classified ads out, basically saying, don't come looking to me to take care of her debt because she's abandoned me, right? Or my husband's abandoned me, and so and really kind of interesting things that I just kind of came across as I'm scanning these newspapers. They weren't related to that specific topic about Alexander Campbell, Western Pennsylvania. Right? And so, I kind of put it aside because they're really interesting kind of things, but that's the kind of thing that you can come across. You can find something that catches your eye, it's very interesting, but if you spend too much time on that, you're not getting to your problem. So stay on target. Maybe it could be something for another class or something else where you could just investigate that some other day, but for the purpose of your project, hold that off. Research needs to be planned. Now, this doesn't mean, of course, that planning involves minute details of, exactly how many hours I'm going to spend in the library and how many hours I'm going to spend reading sources. But you should have a general idea of what are the things that I'm going to do to get from this question that I have to that final research paper. And we'll talk about some of those things over the next couple weeks, about finding sources, evaluating sources, taking notes, citation, all those kind of things. But as you face a research project like a paper, you need to take the time to kind of plan out where you're going to go, what kind of sources am I going to look for, where am I going to investigate this issue, what am I going to do after that. All of that is a part of research. So why is research important? What is it that makes research some aspect of why we have you do research in biblical studies, let alone the importance of research in biblical studies at all? First of all, research is important because it allows you to develop skills to solve problems, to recognize what a problem is and the steps about going about solving. Obviously, you can, as you go through your studies here, learn about a lot of information related to the Bible, to the biblical text, related to issues in ministry, but you're not going to face everything that could come up in a real-life situation. And so it's important to be able to figure out, all right, let's say you're a youth minister and somebody in your youth group comes up to you with a question about something that you've never thought about before, or information that you've never heard of before. Now, obviously, in a situation like that, your goal is not to write a research paper. You're trying to answer this question for this student. So, if you have no idea of how to go about the process of research, you're going to do what that student's going to do. Google it, right? And you might find information that's useful. You might find information that's not useful. You might find information that's correct. You might not find information that's false. And so, if you don't have those skills of how do I weigh sources and what sources are considered more reliable, then what kind of end result are you going to get? You might come to the right conclusion, the right answer by happenstance, or you might not. So having some of these skills can be important, not just in creating a research paper, but in addressing particular issues in ministry. Research is also important because it provides you skills to learn on your own. Again, it's kind of, you might have heard the saying, if you give a person a fish, you feed that person for a day, but if you teach that person how to fish, you feed them for a lifetime. Well, essentially that's what research in a biblical studies program in a university setting is meant to do. It's meant to provide you ways that you can do this on your own. Again, recognizing problems and solving them, giving you some tools to do your own research in ministerial settings and academic settings, etc. Furthermore, just the process of research itself provides important skills that don't just apply to research, but apply to a wide variety of situations, including interacting with people. Things like observation. There's so much we can learn just by observing. And so research provides some skills on observation, paying attention to things, but also analysis. What's important, what's not. And so thinking about going back to a ministry setting, somebody comes to you with a problem. And one of the things that you will discover is often that the problem that presents itself might not be the real problem. There might be a deeper problem that really needs to be addressed before this particular issue. And so by having these skills of observation, of analysis, of listening to people, of breaking down what they're saying, thinking about what they're saying, very important skills. Synthesis, bringing a lot of different information together, making judgments. Right? Not talking about judging, but saying, okay, here's this information that I'm getting. What is the right way to go? What's really at stake here? And so all of these skills that you develop while learning how to research are useful in other types of settings that are important, especially in ministry. So what does research design mean? Getting into the planning of this. Well, I'm thinking about the planning and thinking about designing a research project. The research projects you, again, are going to design are not exactly what you might see in a scientific type of setting, where there's a lot of things that go into designing a research project. But there are still some things that you need to think about when engaging in research, whether that's in the setting of doing a research paper or discovering some information while you are engaged in ministry. First of all, you have to ask yourself, what is it I'm looking for? What's the information that I need? Again, that is shaped by that question. Now, as you go through the process of research, you might refine or change your question, and you might have to adjust your question as you become more knowledgeable about a particular issue. But essentially, you need to have some sort of idea in mind of what you are looking for. Right, so my question is, I'm looking at this passage in John. Does it belong there? So what am I looking for? I'm looking for information that will help me determine whether or not this passage belongs to the Gospel of John. That's what I'm looking for. This is the information that will answer my question. So you have to think, okay, what's my question? What information will answer that question? Secondly, once you kind of have the idea of what you're looking for, you have to ask yourself, where do I find that information? Where is it that I need to go to look to find information about this passage? So, again, the issue that we're looking at. I'm trying to decide whether or not this passage belongs in the Gospel of John. I need information about whether or not it's original. Where do I go? So, where would you go if you're looking for information about this passage? All right, your question is, does the woman taken in adultery belong in the Gospel of John? Where do you go to find information about this?
Biblical commentaries.
All right, so commentary. All right, a set of commentaries. You're going to look at a variety of commentaries, but a commentary is going to help you. A good commentary will help you by giving you information about this issue. Where else might you go? Where else would have information related to this question?
I guess you look at the original Greek or Hebrew manuscripts.
Okay, so I mean, certainly, if you had those skills, you would want to go to the Greek text, look at the different manuscripts, find information about that. Unless you're really skilled in Greek for this class, then probably, the commentaries are going to help you, but also things like journal articles related to this issue. There's all sorts of things that you would want to go. So where is this information going to be found? Thirdly, how will you go about finding it? How is it that you will discover this information? All right, so this information is going to be found in commentaries. It's going to be found in journal articles. It might be found in encyclopedia. Right? I've identified places where I will discover this information. Okay, great. Where do you go to find that information? Where do you go to find those sources? And so you have to think about things like, I go to the library card catalog, or I go to, I have some books on my shelf, or I go to this particular electronic database. And thinking about this process of research, I've identified my topic, discovered what information I need to answer my question. I just thought about the places where it can be found, and now I'm, going about I decided here's where I need to go to find it. And then finally, what will you do with it once you find it? Now in this class, of course, what you do with it is you write a paper. But in other types of situations, it might be I preach a lesson, teach a Bible class. I write a bulletin article. But what is it that I'm going to do with this information? And once I've brought it all together, where am I going with it? And so thinking through those steps are important parts of thinking through research problems.